here is going to be the basis of all of today and the main fact of everything that we're dealing with. I'm rolling a die. And let's say we want it to be, let's say I can predict what it's going to be. And I think it's going to be a 5. Okay. I just rolled. What has now happened? I was either right or wrong. But what do you not know?
If you were right or wrong.
You have no idea if I was right or wrong. So this level right here is going to be whether I was right or wrong, but you're actually never ever going to know that answer. So kind of like theoretically here, I'm actually never going to know if this was a B student or not. We don't have to deal with that part of it. Because if I'm really doing the study, if I knew that answer, why would I be doing the study? So it's something that I'll probably never ever be able to obtain. So I claim something. My claim is either true or it is false. And that's what throws people off. I think it helps a little bit, like seeing it with this, because they're like, well, if it's true, then I know what I should do. Well, you'll never actually know that. So we'll never actually know this. This is my label for this level. Yeah. The truth value, I guess. Alright, so here is what we choose to do. Well, after all of these processes that we just did, we don't just like flip a coin and decide which one we feel like picking. We actually base it on sample data. So based on the sample data, what did we choose to do? Now, thinking about it in terms of we understand null and alternative hypothesis a little bit, this is what it technically is, but what do we actually mean if the null hypothesis is false? We actually are saying that what? In general, always, if I say this isn't true, I'm proving it where? Like, so if I wouldn't just say my answer is that he's not a B student. I would say what? So if your null hypothesis is false, that's actually saying what? And that's actually a good way to think about it instead. So if he's not a B student, he's not a B student because he's above B student. That's what we just found. Or what we were testing. So we have two options at the end of the test. There is something about a null hypothesis, and I have two choices of what I can do with that null hypothesis. What are they?
Reject or filter.
So these are my different scenarios. In this scenario, I could reject the null hypothesis, or I could fail to reject the null hypothesis. This gives me a separate scenario. I can reject the null hypothesis or fail to reject. So these are just all of the possible scenarios that could happen. Okay, so I just rolled the die. I said I could predict it. I'm either right or I'm wrong. So this scenario here would be, I actually could correctly predict it, but you told me what? You told me that I couldn't. I told you I could correctly predict it, and you couldn't tell me I was wrong. Right? I couldn't actually correctly predict it, and what? And you told me I couldn't. I couldn't predict it, but you couldn't show that I couldn't. That kind of makes sense. So, if the null hypothesis is true, what should you do? Which of these paths would be correct? What? If this is true, you shouldn't reject it. So that would mean you did it correctly. If the null hypothesis is false, what should you do? You should reject it. And now give me a little bit of room here, so just put the check off to the side. So you understand that these two are wrong. Something was wrong. These are called errors. There is a type 1 error and a type 2 error. The reason it's called type 1 and type 2 is not what I'm about to explain to you, but the reason I'm about to explain to you is because you can remember which one's which. This scenario here, if my claim is true or my claim is false, which one was something where somebody did something wrong? Not looking down here. If here's the claim is true, here's the claim is false, which one did I mess up on? Right, I messed up. If my null hypothesis was true and you did this, you messed up, right? Yes. So down this path, how many people messed up? Just you. If we went down this path, I messed up, but you also messed up. So how many people messed up down this path? So that's not the reason for calling it type 1 and type 2, but that makes a whole lot more sense of how to remember which was which.
I don't understand when the middle two are correct.
So like, if okay, innocent, guilty. So if we reject the null hypothesis in the scenario of court case, that would mean what? This is what the court does. So if the court rejects the null hypothesis, that means the court determines what? They convict him, right? If they fail to reject, what do they do? Right? Which is the same thing over here. They either convict or let him go. So if he is innocent, what should the court do? but they have evidence and everything lines up and it looks bad, and it ends up being where he is innocent, but they accidentally convict him. That is an error. How many people messed up? Just the court. So that's type 1 error. Here, if he is guilty, what should the court do? Convict him. But they don't have enough evidence, so they accidentally let him go.
So we want the null hypothesis to be true. Well, is that why
Pretty
we?
much saying practice, assuming that the top is true or false. The direct one is the two in the middle.
Right.
Well, assuming it's true, why is it true?
Like, if it is, okay, so if I rolled a 5, and I told you I was going to, your evidence should tell me that I rolled a 5. That would be the correct thing to do.
So it looks like we want null hypothesis to be true, so we reject it if it's false, and fail to reject it if it's true.
We don't want one of these versus the other. That part's not. Like, I don't want somebody to go kill somebody. Like, that's not what I'm talking about here.
No, yeah.
So, like, I don't want them to be innocent. I don't want them to go do it. It's that I'm doing the correct thing once the thing's already happened.
That's why I'm asking. So if it's false, we reject it. If it's true,
Yes, if it is false, we should reject.
okay.
If it is true, we should not reject.
Okay.
Yes. And I don't mind going as slow as I need to for today because I want to make sure that y'all are with me before I keep going. Hello? Yes. Right now? Okay. Thank you. Bye. Do you have something for the health person? No?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me skip around then because I don't want to. I would rather clear things up and finish this than just keep going in order. So go to type 1 error. So an error means we messed up. So just looking at our table, what decision did we make if a type 1 error? We made the decision to do what?
Reject something that is
We incorrectly rejected the null hypothesis when, and then now followed up when what?
And it was true.
So this is just putting into words what the table shows. So type 2 error would be that we incorrectly, and if you're ever doing this, I don't care if you write the word incorrectly, but I'm kind of showing you this error. We made the decision to, what with type 2?
Fail to.
When
So we don't have to put the incorrectly. We just want to-
right. Alright, and then interpreting it. Say, I always say something. I always say we find or we do this. The we part is the fact that we use data and showed what the data showed. So data shows is probably a better thing. Writing based on sample data is so that you guys understand that.
Should we write that in different color?
No, I'm gonna do about the thing. Like this, we find that it is based on sample data. I might come back and change something right up there. Alright, so this is not on your paper, but I think with where you guys are, the cues I'm getting from you guys, I want to go over one with absolutely zero context and make sure that we can understand from a null alternative hypothesis, what the type 1 and type 2 errors are. And there's no room on your paper. If you want to write this down, you can, but this is more just like so that I can clear up the looks on your faces. So I don't care that you write this or don't. So absolutely no context, no units, no anything. A type 1 error would mean I want to do this so I have it to mark on. That the null hypothesis is true, but that we what? We rejected it. Right? So let's start with what we did. We said we find what? So we find that that it is greater than 10. Do not overthink this. Do not try harder than you should. We find that it's greater than 10, but actually what? And that way I don't have to think about the less than, the not equal to, the that kind of thing. So we find that it's greater than, but it actually is not. So a type 2 error is actually saying that the alternative is true, because that's the direction of the evidence. So this would be, we find, based on sample data, that the mean what? So we were trying to prove this. Did we have evidence or did we not? So we find that the mean, we did not have evidence if we failed to reject. But what? Does that make sense? And so if you can think about it this simple, it should help. And that's where is not, I don't know if, I think this is fine written like this, but y'all might tweak that a little bit. All right, so let's go ahead and skip to this then for right now. On the back, I don't know where this is, but it says example, Sarah is very sick. I think it's on the bottom of the left, maybe, I don't know. I wrote this scenario to not have much going on with it. Sarah's very sick and her levels are dangerously high. I didn't even say what kind of levels. I don't want to deal with that.
Wait, for type 2, what we just did, I'm sorry, what?
We didn't have evidence of the alternative hypothesis.
So I thought we failed to reject it.
We failed to reject the null hypothesis.
Okay, I got you. No, but yeah, but then our type 2 error said we find that the mean is not greater than 10, but it actually is.
We didn't have evidence of the alternative.
This is the truth of the matter, but we don't know this bit. This is what we get based off of our sample. So if we were to go through a sample and say, okay, we don't have enough evidence, but in actuality, no clue to us, this is what actually happened.
Like, you can't tell me that what I rolled is wrong. But it actually was that what I rolled was wrong. But you'll never know that. Right, so Sarah's very sick. Her levels, so we're just going to be dealing with the mean of her levels, are dangerously high. They have her on a new trial medicine that can only be taken for 2 weeks and is supposed to be lowering her levels. It's supposed to be lowering her levels. We want to see if it is or not. So circle that. If it does not work, then she'll undergo a very serious and risky operation. That part we don't have to deal with yet. So what would we write as our null hypothesis here? We'll just say I didn't even give you a number. Our alternative is we need to see if the medicine is working. And if the medicine is working, then what? Her levels are lower. So we want to see, is there evidence that this medicine is lowering her levels? So now, just like we did here, write out type 1 error. So we're at the hospital, we're running the tests, and it is our job to tell the doctors this medicine is working, or there's not evidence that this medicine is working. That's why we were brought in. That is our only purpose in the whole thing. So we find, based on sample data, that her mean levels what? So we, in a type 1, we chose to reject, which means we found that her mean levels what? We found that the medicine is working, essentially. But what? That's one way to write this, and I didn't include much words. I did not include much context. Another way to write this is to go completely context. We find, based on sample data, what does this mean in the context of the scenario? But what? So this scenario would be our data that we collected show the medicine is working. We tell the doctors the medicine is working. But unbeknownst to us, it actually is not. We got a bad sample or something. All right, so type 2 error. So write out type 2 error for Sarah. So this one say, we find based on sample data that but actually so can you understand what's going on in context? So in context here, this would be, we find our data shows that what? So based off the sample data that I collected, I do not have convincing evidence to tell the doctor that this medicine is working. And that's all I have to go on. So we are always going to have consequences of errors in every test. So here, if we find that the medicine is working, so we are just that in-between guy saying here, the doctor or the nurse did the numbers, the nurse gave us the numbers, and we came back to the doctor and said, this is what it said, it's working or it's not. So what are the consequences of a type 1 error in this situation? If we tell them that the medicine is working, what are they going to do? And I specifically added in the part about she can only take the medicine for 2 weeks. Basically saying, like, they send her home, like, you're doing great. I didn't write anything as to ... How gruesome you want to get. So when we send her home and tell her this medicine really seemed to work, or the doctor's really sitting behind the curtain going, hee, we really know it didn't. Like, they don't know that. They didn't do it on purpose. They'll never know that they got it wrong, maybe later. But this kind of thing happens in real world. Like, you never know what the actual truth is. So for type 2 error, what would be our consequence?
That you don't give it to her, and she goes like under the operation.
So she ended up undergoing the operation unnecessarily and faces those risks.
So in this scenario, what's our true or what's our false? Like what's our innocent or guilty, whether it works or not?
The initial is what her levels are. The alternative is that they're dropping.
So like
So basically,
if it's true, it means medicine's not working.
wait, so
If
our
it's not,
true would be, yes, the medicine's not working. The false would be the medicine is lowering it. And to be honest, I have to draw this out every time I think about one of these problems still. This to me helps me. And you'll see books that do the same chart in a two-way table. And I don't know why, but to me, that makes my brain just doesn't like it. And they do and then so this one would end up being a type 1. This one ends up being a type 2. So you might see it drawn like this. I don't know why. To me, this just makes a lot more sense to me to see it that way. But it's saying the exact same thing. Alright, so before any scenario ever happens in the real world in statistics, they actually have to consider both of these circumstances before they ever do anything. So they've got Sarah, they've got her in the hospital. They now have to consider, well, if I mess up one way, we can be sending her home, and that's not good. I can mess up another way and make her do the surgery when she shouldn't have had it, and that's also not good. Should they worry about both of these things? Yes. Should they spend time worrying about both of these things? Yes. Should they worry about if things go right? They want to happen, right? So they should worry about just in case things are wrong, what it would do. So they have to consider both of these before they actually start your test. In this scenario, both of them are pretty bad, right? It's just a different kind of bad. There are some scenarios where it's like, now we can do it. We're going to end up talking about the scenario for this classroom yesterday, with the scenario with the 30-second thing. If we're wrong one way, then you decide not to do it, so you miss out on the chance for the money. If we're wrong another way, you all go in the room and don't make it out. One of those is a little worse than the other one, right? So sometimes they're both similarly bad, but then sometimes one of them is dramatically worse than the other one. And we have to definitely consider that. So let's flip back to the front, where I stopped, the part that I didn't fill in right here. So these are my possible different scenarios. We got type 1 error, type 2 error, or I did the right thing. But I also have probabilities that relate to those. the probability of a type 1 error is alpha. The probability of a type 2 error is capital beta. Which one of those have we seen before? Alpha. Alpha is our significance level. Alpha is what p-value has to be less than, right? If we are in a scenario where type 1 error is something that is very, very, very terrible if it happens, what kind of alpha should we have? A really small one. If type 2 error is terrible, 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 can't happen, then we're going to do something else. Does that make sense? So like, this is alpha. I picked that before I start. So I consider these before I set this. You are never actually going to have to do math with these to figure out which one's which or how much it would be. You are responsible for the relationship between them and like the decision process here. Have we done everything on the front of these boxes?